got it. Have fun.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Blast. Bye. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Tim.
We have a couple of guests waiting, 3 guests waiting so far. What's happening? Hi, Barbara.
Hi, how you doing, Tim?
It looks like you've been busy today, based on my walk.
Yeah, getting some stuff to Buffalo Street and some stuff here, and now we're buy local, getting to be buy
I
local.
want you to leave everything on Snyder Hill Road.
But so tell me about this Whole Food sign. Did you?
Don't know.
I'm wondering if the realtors for the dollar store put it up just to.
I believe it's on Frank Proto's land, and we called him, and Mark
I have a comment.
No, nothing. Yes, comments are always welcome.
Well, you know, I was talking to my son about it, and he reminded me that Whole Foods is supposed to come downtown.
That's not Whole Foods, but
it's not. I thought it was going to take over the Hobby Lobby place.
No, it's whatchamacallit. It's the other one.
Trader Joe's.
Oh, is it?
Trader Joe's.
Okay, so nobody knows what this is about?
And Frank Proto wouldn't say.
You wouldn't say?
We're on recording, by the way.
Oh, yeah. But doesn't he have to get, whoever's building that, don't they have to get a permit?
They're going to build anything there. That means it.
I see. Interesting.
Signs have deep semiotic value.
I'm going to unmute myself. Or I'm going to mute myself.
You just muted yourself.
Yeah, I meant to do that. I think it's a good idea that I just be quiet.
Hey, Rebecca, welcome.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm a couple minutes late. It was
You're not late.
suddenly.
You're on Zoom time.
Okay. Okay.
It takes a long time to click and let people in.
Hi, everybody.
How you been? How are you?
Good. How about you?
Good. I'm admitting a few guests. Hi, everybody. Jonathan. And the other Barbara. And Bill, but I think Bill might not come. So wait just a second. Hope everyone has been enjoying the weather.
Hot.
It looks like Ellen is outside, still
On my
outside.
porch.
Very smart move.
Yeah.
We need rain.
Here's Bill. Hard to imagine starting this meeting without Jonathan, so.
I don't know, it's 7:05.
Hi, Bill.
Hi there.
So we're officially recording the meeting, and this is the September 28th meeting of the Land and Use Force of the town of Caroline. And we have, I noticed, 3 guests. Here's Jonathan. I'll pause just a minute for Jonathan.
Hello.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi.
Everybody's here. So we have 3 guests. We have a tradition of privileges. Would like to address the task force for up to 3 minutes. You're welcome to do so. And perhaps the best way for you to get recognized is to, on participants, raise your Zoom hand. And it appears that no one wants to address privilege of the floor, so let's begin our meeting. I hope you received again what was perhaps too voluminous a set of readings this week, but we wanted to provide us with as broad a set of background as possible, anticipating that not everybody would read everything, but we hope that some of this addressed some of the issues that were raised from last week, and I are with our town attorney about a few things. We thought that maybe first I should just ask if anybody has any questions or remarks, and then I thought what we do is Greg said he had a few clarifications from last week, and so we could begin the meeting with him perhaps. But first, let me just open it up to the floor to see if anybody has any comments, or other than to tell him already exhausted by this process, and it's only the beginning. Anybody? Ken? Ken,
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, are you on the phone or you're on video? You're on the phone?
I don't know,
That's fine.
I guess how to do the video. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and I
Okay.
can see your hand. Yes.
So, do you know maybe get my picture up there? I'm
On the
trying
bottom,
to, but I don't know how.
on the bottom of your screen, Ken, there should be
Yeah,
the lower left-hand corner. There should be something that says video.
Yeah.
And if you click on that, it should work.
start video.
Yep. There you are.
They are.
Here we are. Okay, I don't know what came. That I'm gonna
No
erase
problem.
that.
No problem.
Now I forgot what I was having, but I forgot then what I was going to ask. So I'll just leave it at that. Sorry.
You'll remember as we move along. Anybody else
Eventually, yep.
have any comments or anything? Well, Greg, do you want
I
to?
have a,
Yes, Rebecca, and you weren't here. You haven't been here. Did you get a chance, Rebecca, to, so I'm sorry that we just got the minutes out today. I just,
didn't get a chance to read the minutes,
That's
but
all
I
right.
did view the video.
oh, then you saw
last
more than the
meeting.
minutes.
And I've at least skimmed everything that you sent out. But I guess one of the things that has really, well, was anybody else surprised that the Red Hook zoning law, or the law that we saw, flat out prohibited formula business? That seemed to me like, can they do that? I mean, that's really, wouldn't that be challenged in court?
Well, I mean, I think we can, we'll just wait and talk about that. We're gonna, on the agenda that I sent around a little while ago, I think we'll reserve a dedicated time to talk about that. And maybe to precede that, Greg might even have something pertaining to that, but yeah, that'll be,
Right.
and obviously they can do it because they did do it.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Greg,
That's
All right, thank you, Tim. Yeah, hello, everyone. I just wanted to follow up. There were a number of good questions last week, and so I just thought I'd start the meeting off just by answering some of those. So let me get here to my notes. So one of the questions was, my cat, let me get her out of the way. One of the questions was, what else under municipal home rule law can Caroline adopt? So we were talking about the general town law and then municipal home rule law, which are separate. And we did send some readings relating to them. They were kind of optional readings for reference. And in general, zoning can be a local law and used for the protection. I shouldn't say even zoning, actually. I just put that note in there, that a local law can be, under the municipal home rule law, can be used for the protection and enhancement of its physical and visual environment. And so to determine whether any regulation is reasonable, it must be shown that a problem exists, the means selected to curt the problem have a real and substantial relation to the result sought, and the means availed of must not unduly fundamental rights of those whose activities or conduct is curbed. Essentially, the means by which the law is put into place can't be arbitrary and capricious. There's that term in legal sense. So to answer what else under municipal home rule law can Caroline adopt, it's really just under that umbrella of kind of what I just stated. And we can get more into that, I think, in our discussions. But meeting, or from the readings, but there's really not a lot of yes or no questions that can be answered of, can Caroline do this or can Caroline not do this? A lot of these decisions are being answered under what have courts said that they can do. Using the example of Dryden banning fracking, that was the first time in the country, and Dryden, and there was no precedent for them to adopt that local law. And so, I think a lot of us want sort of an easy, straightforward answer of, well, can we adopt, or can Caroline adopt design guidelines with stricter teeth? The answer isn't a clean yes or no. It's a probably, but it needs to tie back to, it needs to really show that there's a problem that plan, especially as the foundation, and that the means to achieve that or overcome that problem don't infringe upon other rights of the property owner. So that's just kind of one thing there. And I think that's really what I want to talk about. And then we can also get into this in a little bit too. I don't want to take up too much time, but that zoning can also happen under town law. And for those of you who didn't read that lengthy Department of State publication about zoning, it's regulated under Article 16 of the New York Consolidated Laws. So under town law, and for the purpose of promoting the health, safety, morals, or the general welfare of the community, the town board is empowered by local law or ordinance to regulate and restrict the height, number of stories and size of buildings and other structures, the percentage of lot that may be occupied, the size of yards, the density of population, and the location and use of buildings, structures, and land for trade, industry, residence, or other purposes. It doesn't say anything in there about aesthetics. However, it's under common law. It's been recognized, and I think by certain court cases that we could probably get into a little bit later, that aesthetics have been recognized as a valid subject of regulation and concern. And then actually touching on Rebecca's, I'm sorry, but I think that was Rebecca who just brought up the with or without zoning. And so essentially site planning is a limited tool, and without zoning, the use is an allowed use. So as I was saying last time, is that retail is retail is retail. And so what zoning can do is it can say retail is allowed in zone A, but it's not allowed in zone B. And so, but again, I think maybe we'll get into that in a little bit. And I have a lot of other notes here, but I think that's just what I wanted to start the meeting off, just to answer some of those questions, specifically about the New York laws. So
I wanted to add just before we started that Mark Whitmer let me know that he was in a meeting with Joan Jerkovitz from the county planning department, and Joan has offered to come to our meetings if that would be helpful. So I thought maybe what we could do is at least invite her next week and see it. I don't want to waste her time, you know, but it might be helpful to hear from her since she's so involved with planning across the county, and any, for example, zoning that the town of Caroline would pass before it could be implemented first would have to go to the county for its consideration and approval also. So it's just part of the process. So Joan's then aware of what's happening across the way. So I think that would be very, very helpful. Everybody think that's a good idea? And then she can decide if she wants to stay with us. It's probably not necessary for her to come every week, but maybe we could invite her just to open the meeting and chat about what she understands is happening. I think that would be really helpful. And Rebecca, let's see, you weren't here last week, right? So one of the things that we've talked about, I'm sorry, I should have done this business before Greg. It's down. One of the things that we talked about last week was perhaps our need to meet a little bit more regularly in order to accomplish our goals. So everyone has agreed as best they can to meet weekly for the next couple of months. We recognize that if some people can't fit that in, we can work around that, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'd initially scheduled tonight so we could get on a 2-week rotation that would satisfy your schedule. So now we've hooked you into something else. But I think that those are the only announcements. We did consult also with Guy Crow, our attorney, and basically I heard back kind of pretty much what he's always said in relationship to site plan review and its teeth. I mean, legally we are allowed to, for example, enact design regulations, design restrictions in relationship to plan review. One of his cautions is you probably can't design regulate everything, so that if the town went about its business trying to do a completely comprehensive design regulation, you'd be going down a bottomless rabbit hole, which is probably the case. But we certainly have the authority to implement pretty much what we want in that regard. The main caveat in all of this is that whatever we do has to be preceded by and fit the spirit and language of the revised comprehensive plan, which the town is currently in a moratorium to get that through. It looks like that will have a relatively speedy arrival at the town board, is my hunch, because the public hearing was held on Thursday, and there didn't appear to be major impediments expressed in that hearing. I think Bill said that there are submitted responses as well. Bill, you received some?
Yes, yeah, we probably got, I mean, I haven't counted them up. I'm sure I've got about 10, 15 written comments as well. Again, across the board, supportive, but they, they'll say, oh, but what about X here? So there's a certain amount of reading through and thinking about that.
So I'm just trying to see if there's anything, so another thing that I just cautioned in relationship to this, of course, is that if you do, let's say, for example, design guidelines, you could have a situation where, as he says, design standards might apply to one type of application or use, but not to another. I don't personally understand why that's a major stumbling block, because you can always make provisions for that. And there's always an appeal process for all of these guidelines as well. And then the other thing that he drumbeats a lot, and I found this again in 2 or 3 emails from him up till today, is that site plan review is about mitigation and not allowing or disallowing the use itself. And that's the differentiation between site plan review and, let's say, zoning. Right, so that's a key difference, and that would mean that, however, mitigation, from my understanding, still needs to meet the standards of site plan design regulations, right? Ellen,
Yeah.
you raising your hand? I couldn't tell if you're just agreeing with me constantly or
I
raising your
am
hand.
agreeing with you most of the time, and then I was raising my hand. Yeah, I reread the site plan law. You'd think I would be more familiar with it since I'm on that review committee. And I do find it bewildering, because we are allowed to disapprove something, but it doesn't really give us any criterion for disapproval. It discusses, it should deal with energy things to the extent practicable, and other phrases like that. So it's a bit bewildering to me. What are grounds for, quote, disapproval? And I feel like I should know that, but I don't. I don't really understand it.
As a member of the
Yeah.
site plan review committee.
I know.
That's really encouraging.
I know. And I could not find my notes from the meeting that we had with Guy, where we talked about such things. And I have emailed the other people on the committee to say, did any of them take notes? I was fairly sure I did, but maybe they're on a scrap of paper somewhere instead of on my computer. So I apologize. But it made me wonder, I wasn't sure where in the Danby and the Dryden stuff that we looked at, it basically said, no formula business can exceed 3,000 square feet. And if we wanted to say such a thing, I don't really understand whether it could be in the site plan or whether it has to be a separate law. And I think, as we've talked about, I think it's unrealistic for us to aim for zoning in the next 6 months, but I don't know whether we would have to pass a separate law restricting formula business in some way, or whether there's a way to put it in the site plan review process. And I really don't understand that.
I did ask Guy about the nature of this 10,000 square foot thing. And it does seem that it's an arbitrary number that could be adjusted in any direction that one wanted. And of course, in our site plan review laws, I understand it, having read it myself, but I think Ellen would know it much better than me. What that figure is it's there are two triggers for for site plan review, commercial site plan review. One is the disturbance of 2 or more acres of land, and
1 acre.
1 acre, 1 acre, okay. And the other is 10,000 square feet, and that seems to be something that could be very easily changed if one wanted to trigger. It doesn't disallow anything; it just triggers, necessarily triggers the review. Is that correct, Ellen?
Yes, exactly right. And frankly, the recent proposal for development on Route 79 was only triggered because of the 1 acre.
1 acre.
Because the square footage was less than that. And I was very surprised that industrial facilities can be much bigger before they would trigger it, except that there's the 1 acre. And you can't be that big and do stuff without probably triggering the 1 acre, but it's kind of peculiar.
Yeah, well, that's something that, of course, down the road we can take into consideration. Yasmin, you had your hand up, please. You need.
Okay, yeah.
There you go.
I read a lot, thoroughly about the reading material, the first time adoption zoning, or adopting zoning for the first time. Yeah, and I found out that the municipal, there are 2 interesting things. One, municipal home rule law is adopting, amending, and repealing zoning regulation. So it's like 2 dynamic connection. So before we have zoning, maybe we can rely on the municipal home rule law, and then, you know, making zoning, and later on we can adopt or amend or something, adjusting. The second thing is, are we going to follow the 7 steps they're suggesting by that reading? That's my question. Thank you so much.
The 7 steps for zoning, is that what you meant, Yasmin?
Yeah, when we adopting the zoning for the first time, that reading material say that there are 7 steps. The first step is forming zoning commission.
Yes, that would be.
And then at the end, until the publication of the zoning, yeah, you know, the 7 steps over there. So, yeah. So are we going to follow that reading, or
that's
just like
that's a prescription? Ways? So yes, we would follow that prescription. But that's something we can discuss later in the evening. So what I'd proposed is spending some time on Red Hook, then design guidelines, and then the zoning processes tonight. Before we do that, Ken, you have your hand up? You're muted, Ken. You need to unmute yourself, which is on the lower left hand.
How's that? Better?
There you go. Fine.
The thing I tried to remember before was, is everybody on our committee okay with taking their email address off of your email that you send us, so that we can have those emails of each person? And like some of what I did was I looked at numerous definitions of formula business, and from that I took little parts of each one, and I got it on I think I got it on Word. I would, as a potential definition of it for the whole group, I would have sent it to everybody, but I wanted permission from everybody to have their email address. Maybe some people don't want to have me have it. And then secondly,
I think that the best way to do
Yes,
it is just to go to one of the emails that I have sent to the entire task force and send it to reply all. And then you can send that to the
Oh.
Town of Caroline address, but it will go out to the task force. And you should certainly feel free to send emails through the Town of Caroline address to the task force.
I'll try to do that. I'm not saying that that definition is not written in stone. It's just a potential definition for it, so we all have an understanding.
Right.
And then the last for now is, Bill, are the written comments going to be on the net, on the website of Caroline?
So that's actually under active discussion, because they are a matter of public record and anyone can request them. We had initially thought about putting them on the web, but then there were some concerns, similarly as you asked about our emails, there's concerns about maybe privacy issues or someone feeling they might be attacked for what they said. So we're actually under active discussion of whether we're actually going to post those. They are available because they are part of the public record, because they're part of the public hearing. So the difference is whether they're out there on the web for anyone to see, or whether they have to go through the labor of contacting the town clerk. And we'll probably make a final decision on Wednesday, if that answers that. And Tim, I guess two quick policy. No problem. Two quick policy. I think what Ken was really asking is permission from the group to have him send them an email, if I understood Ken's request right. And are folks okay with us, I guess, again, like you say, replying all and sending stuff to everybody? I'm fine with that. I guess the question is, are any objections? Okay. But the other policy or question I have for you, Tim, is there is an anonymous caller on this meeting, and I don't know if we have a policy. Someone just, for me, it just shows up as Cornell. And so do you care, I guess, and does the committee care, and do we want to request that they identify themselves, or do we not care?
I'm just going to jump in. Open meeting. You cannot. They don't need to identify themselves.
We are always happy for them to do. We're always happy for them to do so, but it's certainly not required.
I can do so if you want. Hello, I'm Lynn. I'm from a Cornell student. I'm actually currently working with the Tompkins County Age-Friendly Task Force, and part of what I've been working on is looking at comprehensive plans and looking at the age-friendly planning side of things. So I was invited to come watch the planning process. So I'm just here kind of as a.
Okay, yeah. And Lynn, you show up as Lynn. There's another one that's a Cornell. It just says Cornell. That's what I was inquiring about.
Oh,
again,
sorry.
That's quite all right. But obviously, you know, it's not a problem. So.
Okay. Well, I think these are areas that we're going to run into along the way, and also since the meeting is recorded publicly and available publicly. Anyone can request that through open source. Let me I thought that maybe we could kind of move through some of these reading areas like we did the other night, just to cover some common ground about them. And maybe the easiest, or maybe the most baffling, but also the most contained, is to talk about the Red Hook formula business example. And of course, in our readings, there were a number of other examples, formula business examples as well. So I'm just going to open it up and see what everybody has to say for a little bit. And if you haven't, maybe we can just have a raise of hands, just so we have a sense of how many of us were able to read that document. I think almost everybody. And for those who weren't able to, maybe I can just say extremely quickly that Red Hook, New York, which is in a smaller community in the Hudson Valley, I think the population's 7,000. So it's not that different. It's a little bit bigger than Caroline. They do have zoning, but within their zoning it appears that they amended their zoning regulations to prohibit both formula business, as well as, I forget what they called it, but let's just say fast food kingdom. And so they adopted that under their zoning law. What was surprising to me is how sparse the language about it was. They just kind of declared maybe that this is what it is and no more discussion. Bill?
So yeah, I'm following up a little bit on what Rebecca, had commented on, because that was obviously one of the most striking things, is that it was an outright ban. And this probably jives with what Ken had written. A form of business is defined as a business that adopts standardized services, et cetera, and sort of give a sort of definition in their zoning law. But the planning compendium also has some information on it, and interestingly, there they mentioned some communities have outright bans, but later there's also legal advice saying, well, an outright ban may well be more challengeable because you're trying to regulate interstate commerce, and that's reserved for Congress. And so there's a strong recommendation that you allow a form of business in some region of the town and not an outright ban. And they gave two examples: a California case that upheld the local ban and a Florida case that didn't.
Yeah.
So all of that is background people that basically you don't know what's going to happen. It comes down to court cases. I don't know the way New York courts would interpret things, but yes, it's pays to be cautious. I would have liked to have seen some more information on, besides a ban, what kind of form of business restrictions are out there. And maybe that's something that, if there's a group that wants to looking at that. I think trying to understand what our goal is here would be important. If our goal is we do not want form of businesses in town, and there are reasons that some people feel that way. I mean, the Planning Compendium points out that locally owned businesses tend to add more back into the local economy because they're getting their supplies from local suppliers rather than some, other national place. So there's rationales for saying, for local character and local economic profitability or robustness, we ought to ban these entirely. Or, well, they do bring in some economic activity. Maybe we should allow, say for us, a couple in Slayerville Springs, but not in Brooktondale. I'm just throwing these things out. So I guess we should decide, is it a ban that this group may, I don't know if it's the right time to decide it, in which case I think that site plan review, as you say, is not the way to go because it's mitigation. Or is it indeed mitigation? We want to lower the density. We maybe want to put some appearance restrictions, in which case site plan is the right venue for tackling it. So at some point we've got to decide, I think, what the goal is, because that will determine what tool can be applied. I'm not saying it has to happen right now, but so that's my thoughts based on the set of readings there.
Barbara Lynch, do you have your hand? You did, Barbara.
Okay. What I was wondering is whether it seems that the comprehensive plan would suggest that we be more concerned about where things go, and that says zoning, right? Than whether you prohibit entirely or just review or regulate aesthetics. I'm not sure how the rest of the committee feels about that, and I would like to hear from people on that. Was I?
Ellen?
Am I muted? No. That's not what I read in the comp plan. So maybe our comp plan person could speak to that, because it seemed to me as though they were saying there's certain things that don't belong in our town at all. And there are other things that might be better located in hamlets. So maybe Bill could speak to that. But I also would ask Greg or others who might know, I'm not sure that without zoning, we can do locational things, right?
Right.
So let's say, as Bill said, maybe we think formula businesses that are no bigger than 3,000 square feet are okay in Slaterville, but not in Brooktondale. I don't know whether that's something without zoning that can be done. So there are two questions I would ask Bill to address at least one.
Yeah, that was my question, really, Ellen.
Mhm.
All right, I'll give 1.5 answers. So for the comp plan, I mean, you know, people will take different things out of it, of course, depending what they bring to it. But I think that the comprehensive plan isn't a location specific thing to say. It talks about wanting, for example, favoring and encouraging locally owned businesses. That's a value stated in the plan for the town. And it doesn't matter where that business is. It's saying we place a greater value on a locally owned business from a non-locally owned business. So that applies townwide. But it does talk about the desire to preserve, say, open space, vistas, environmental quality. And to do that, one of the techniques is to encourage, if there's to be development, to encourage it to occur in clustered ways so that the intervening areas stay undisturbed. So in that sense, it does have, you know, a zoning type aspect, but it doesn't specify, well, it does specify in where the residential areas are would like to be in a vision map. So it does both, I guess what I would say. Is it really, though, in terms of this task force, what it talks about in terms of commercial development is most strongly an emphasis on sort of small and local, sort of the small is beautiful idea. In terms of the other part, though, the other half answer, and Greg can go, you know, into more, the design guidelines for Dryden, for example, specify something outside of their zoning that they call character areas. So the design guidelines also divvied up the town in a way different from how the zoning divvied it up. And so it seems to me that that is a possible thing. I don't know how strong that tool is, but it sounds like there's something that you can define a region, say in this region, again, you couldn't probably ban a business. You could say business should look more like X. And this other region, businesses look more like Y. And that's exactly what Dryden did with their Route 13 corridor. And they broke with 3 different pieces.
Greg, do you have any?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, it's all in line with what I would say. And Ellen, I think you're on track with that. I would agree that it almost seems that without zoning, it is difficult to just outright ban something, because that is the premise of zoning, is that, I mean, that saying this is a residential area and this is an industrial area. And Ellen, is there something that am I misspeaking on something?
Maybe I can ask Jonathan. He's been waving his hand for a long time. So first, Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to go a couple steps back. I really think it would be important. We keep jumping to zoning, but it really is important to consider this idea of the municipal home rule law, because I think if you really look at it, you could use that law to ban townwide. I don't see why you couldn't. It doesn't. You don't need zoning. You don't need to break up the town to then ban something, which means zoning isn't appropriate. But if we wanted to, you wanted to say commercial needs to be smaller than 5,000 square feet townwide, municipal home rule allows us to do that. It doesn't have to be part of zoning. So I don't know why we keep jumping to zoning if particular thing that we want.
If I want to clarify my answer, because I mean, Jonathan is right, and that's what I was trying to say, is that, yes, that's what I meant by the difference between site plan review versus, I didn't say necessarily it had to be zoning, but you might have to pass a form of business restriction law if you wanted to ban a use like a form of business, for example. You would have to have a law that does that, because you can't do that, as I understand it, under site plan review, because it's, again, that site plan review tends to be a mitigation strategy. But you don't have zoning to pass that law. However, if you want to say we don't want X here, but it's okay there, then you have to have zoning. So Jonathan, you're entirely right. A townwide ban does not require zoning. But if one wants a finer to control, then of course you do have to have that. And I think it's obviously clear that zoning would take a while to implement. So part of what we want to think about is, you know, what's near term, what's far term goals.
And I can add to that, just having reviewed the town law regulations from the state, that that, for example, regarding these procedures, it says follow procedures for adapting or amending its zoning ordinance or local law, as the case may be. And the town law makes that distinction 2 or 3 times, so that the town law can in this case be an envelope for this kind of townwide regulation, which is different from zoning. Barbara?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that I agree with the interpretations that are being put forward about this notion that without zoning, a town can still institute a restriction or ban as long as it applies town-wide. And that leads to my question, just for my own understanding, is there any operation in the town of Caroline currently that is a formula business or would meet the definition of a formula business? And if so, how do those kind of retroactive things apply if a town were to choose to ban something, but that something already exists in the
As
town?
Greg and I were discussing earlier in a phone conversation, the Dandy Mini Mart is a formula business, and I looked it up on its website, and it looks like over 40 locations between Pennsylvania and New York.
Yeah.
And as I've read across all these formula business examples that we had, it seems to me that usually it's 10 like it or more is the benchmark for that. But as I believe, Greg, that I'm correct that most of these formula business laws, as I've read them, always starts with new formula businesses. So on-site things would be grandfathered in.
Okay.
Right, Greg?
Yeah, I would say it, and that can be just specified in the law itself. And so most laws that are introduced will have some sort of continuation of uses from this date, but before can still operate given these set of criteria. And I think, they can usually be tailored. Every town will have a very different kind of set of criteria. If this existing use expands by a certain amount, that might trigger it to come into compliance with the new law if it stays under that. And but those can typically be tailored again with being reasonable and not being that arbitrary and capricious.
And is that the only one in the entire town of Caroline, to people's knowledge?
Is the storage facility on 79, is that just over the line, or is that in Caroline?
I don't think that's like a franchise of a big chain.
That's a local business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to follow up on, is it okay if I just kind of jump in here with my hand?
Of course.
We're talking about, a town-wide ban. And I just jotted down, a ban based on use is one thing, so oftentimes we'll have adult use bans or adult use restrictions. But we're getting into talking about a ban based on designs. And the formula, all the formula business restrictions that we've been reading, that the definitions of them have all been talking about. There's certain types of designs, some formulaic designs happening, or formulaic operations. Well, you can't restrict the operation of the business, but so I'm just sorry, my cat keeps getting in the way. I just don't know what the legal precedent is for banning based on designs, because there's certainly legal precedent for banning based on use, as well as bans based on dimensions. Our town doesn't allow anything larger than 20,000 square feet of commercial use, and that just applies across the board. So I'm looking at 3 types of bans: the use, dimension, which seem that have been upheld to some extent, but banning townwide based on design restrictions I just think it deserves understanding of the courts. That Tim, as the moderator, there are a couple hands.
I know.
Michelle had her hand up. Michelle, you're muted.
Yeah. I guess I didn't understand that that there was any discussion of banning just on design. I thought the discussion was banning a use. I've been confused about why design keeps coming into it, because I feel like you can make something very pretty, but if it's still the wrong thing in the wrong spot, that's the problem. Like, you know, I'm sorry to say I didn't get to the readings because partly I went to New Hampshire this weekend, and actually I passed in Vermont, I passed a Dollar General that was made to look like some old-timey barn. It looked unlike any other, you know, store like that I've ever seen, you know, but it was obviously they had laws or regulations to make it blend in to their town's decor. And that's the only one, and I've seen lots of them in New Hampshire, they look totally different. So I didn't think it was a problem of design. I thought it was a problem of use. I guess that's all I'm going to say.
I might add that in relationship to this, to where Greg was going, I also think that a number of the formula business restriction laws that I've read, design was only part of it. So a number of them focus on the percentage of formulaic products from out of the region. They talk about, I guess they are design issues, but then design issues such as uniforms, signage, et cetera, but a large part of them, I think a significant weight for them does have to do with the commercial activity, the generic commercial activity itself of importing generically marked products. That's how I read it, at least.
Yeah, even in, this is Barb, even in the definition in the Red Hook case, it goes beyond, it's not just design, it's clearly use. And I would imagine if we looked at Ken's compilation of definition for formula business, we'd see that as well.
And following in on that, so the sort of, it's a combination of design use, but some of the communities have banned them. If, again, ban is not necessarily the goal, it could be the goal, but ban them or restrict them based on, we have a unique natural, local character. We want to be different than other places. That is part, not just of our charm, but of our tourism base. And I think similar arguments could easily apply to, much of Caroline. That's why I question whether, well, maybe Slaterville Springs would be different, but we can't go there maybe until, we have zoning. But it is not just, oh, it doesn't fit in because it doesn't look right. It makes, our economic base rests in part on being different from other places, and these make us the same as other places. And that's some of the argument being made. Again, whether it flies, whether it holds water, that's where you have to start looking at court cases. But so it's not just design, it's a combination, I agree, design and use.
And I noticed
apply to as many as you can, honey, and one of them will hit.
Oh. Yeah. And I also, this is Catherine, I don't know how to get the thing to wave. Sorry. I also think, so I put a clap up there. So also to Bill's point, and it isn't about just how pretty it is. That's far beyond what you said. I also think on these businesses, again, of course, using what is existing around here as best as possible versus like that Dollar General imports everything from overseas with not fair practices. But also, we do have to be cognizant of how useful a formula business may be to our ultimate community. It may not be exactly what we desire to shop at or do, but there are socioeconomic issues within this town that may need to be addressed and make it fair because not everyone can afford to shop at the Brookton. So I guess that's, I'm not saying an outright ban. I guess it's a consideration to think about.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be good to get into those kinds of philosophical conversations for sure. But I mean, I think if you come down to transportation via vehicles, one of the goals of some of these formula businesses, like a Family Dollar, is to put as many as you can within a certain radius of each other to maximize profit. And so if someone really wants to go to Dollar General, they can drive 10 miles already to go to a Dollar General. We don't need another one in this town because there's plenty already.
Well,
So
we're not
Yeah,
talking about Dollar
I
General
agree.
specifically, just to remind everyone. We're not-
Right. It
that's
was
not
just an
what we're doing.
example. It was just an example. I am no way for a Dollar General, and I understand you can drive 3 miles probably to get to one, but yeah.
Ellen? Ellen, you're muted, I think.
Unmute.
There you go.
Catherine's point is something that we should have in mind. And it's one of the reasons that potentially we would want to allow for a waiver or an exemption or giving an okay if we requested and required a robust economic analysis. And that analysis should take into account both users and their needs, as well as what happens economically, where are the goods coming from, where is the money going to that circulates. So potentially we should be thinking about some kind of an economic analysis. If, again, personally, my thoughts are that we should very much limit the size of formula businesses in town-wide. And we should have design standards, guidelines to require what they look like. And then there would be the potential, it seems to me, that if somebody was looking for an exemption, because in all laws, I think you have to provide for the opportunity for a waiver. And if there was an application for a waiver, that an economic analysis should be part of that application. And that could address both the potential for people who are of lesser economic needs to use that, but also address where the money is coming from and going to.
Barbara?
Yes, again, just to get back to the point that formula business definition and the basis on which formula businesses can be restricted is at least in part use related. If we look at the Red Hook example, specifically, they call out uses and across the board exempt a particular use where they say an agricultural support business shall not be included in the definition of a formula business. And so again, that's the kind of thing that can be done, you know, whether it's a gas station or whatever it is, a grocery store, a blah, 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 whatever, those kinds of things can be built into the definition of a formula business.
One of the things, just to shift gears just a tiny bit, that I'd like to come back to is maybe to pursue a little bit more Jonathan's point that formula business isn't design. But one of the things that we're charged with by the town board is to investigate various potential tools that might be applicable to the revised comprehensive plan. And one of those applicable tools is design standards, potentially. So I think it's important for us to, at least at this stage, this would be my recommendation, is to keep moving on multiple fronts. You could have a scenario where this task force could get locked into providing only one recommendation to the town board, and the town board could just say, we can't go in that direction. So I think it would be beneficial to us to keep actively moving, at least at this stage, on various fronts. And it's so interesting how informed already this discussion has been, just on the basis of this reading that we've done. So would it be okay now if we just shifted to a little bit of focus on design guidelines?
There were some hands raised, though.
Bill's hand is raised. Bill, are you?
I think I simply forgot to unraise my hand, which is in person it's easy because it gets tired, but the computer doesn't do that.
And I'm generally watching this pretty carefully, and I could see the screen. But Ken, did you have something that you wanted to say? Is your hand still raised from the last time? You're muted, Ken. You're still muted?
No, I'm on. I can get my hand raised though.
There you go.
Two different things. One, in one of the materials that I read, if you were a design might be okay as far as building goes to change, but if you were to pit formula business against some of the local businesses to make those local businesses profitable, that was a no-no. And then the second thing I like to say is, I understand that in a particular situation that John mentioned, that there are numerous stores, but most of them are 10 to 15 miles away. And when we talk about climate change, driving maybe 3 miles to a store and getting your needs is much better for the climate and the environment than driving 15 miles. It also saves those less, I hate to say lower income, but that's I guess what I mean. Lower income people that can afford to get that 3 miles. All right, I'm good.
Thanks, that was helpful, thank you. So can we just open it up to the examples of the design guidelines that we took a look at? We thought it would be helpful just to literally look at this to give us a sense of what we're talking about, at least. If the task force were to recommend this design guidelines as one approach for implementation, these could be potential templates for us to use. Any comments?
Tim, are what we're talking about is the visual appearance then, noise and light pollution, air and water quality? Are those the things we're talking about now?
Right, or siding designs, materials, etc.
Well, truck delivery and loading docks.
Right.
I've got a list of them here that if you don't mind me reading through it, I'll try to go quick if that's okay.
Go ahead. Sure.
A bus stop or other transportation at a site where people can gather, depending on where formula business might be, trails, support for residents and local businesses also. Abandonment and design, that's quite a topic right there. Social gathering, the times of opening and closing a place, delivery hours so that there's not too much noise from truck traffic, no parking for RVs overnight type of thing. Something needs to be looked at as far as oil fluids from vehicles leaking onto the pavement and where they're gonna flow to in the rainstorms, traffic safety. I'm not sure if we have any historic areas in Caroline. I'm not familiar with any, but that might be something to look at and where you can place formula businesses. Well, that's a pretty good list right there. I got a couple other things, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you. Barbara?
Yeah, I'll just comment in a general way about both the Dryden and Danby guidelines that you shared with us. That one thing that I really liked about them, if we move in this direction, was the way that visuals and graphics were incorporated throughout. You know, it seems to me that that could be helpful for like the site plan review committee to have some visual guidance, because you know people are, you know, different people have different learning and different you know, kind of knowing styles. You know, some are more word based and some are more visually based or pictorial based, and so it just seemed to me to be a nice presentation to get the mind thinking about what would be acceptable and what might not be acceptable. So you know, something to think about, content of guidelines.
Bill, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So yeah, just a few things. You know, for me, I will admit I'm looking at these in part trying to say, well, geez, do these seem to have more teeth or something than what we've got? Does that mean that these would be a useful tool? And I came away feeling sort of mostly yes. And you know, it's still true that a fair amount of it is a little bit squishy and open to interpretation. You know, the Danby ones talk about they should draw on design traditions of upstate New York and the town of Danby, which they do eventually define, you know what that means, which has to do with 1790 through 1950 traditional patterns of human scale, et cetera. You know, that's all a little squishy. But somewhere else, they say things like, well, light poles shouldn't exceed 18 feet. And, you know, they should be sealed from there. So there are ways, I guess, you can make very specific design. Maybe they now. So I'm taking from that it is possible to do that. So that's one thing I took away from that reading. In the Dryden reading, as I mentioned already, one thing that took away is that you can have sort of different design standards or guidelines in different regions of the town, that might well be appropriate. And I think that might well fit very well for a town like Caroline, because we have a few hamlets and then we have more rural areas. And then I was looking again at Dryden for, okay, so how enforceable is this? How much teeth is it? And I found it interesting that there was a sentence that said adherence to the design guidelines is expected to the maximum extent practicable. So I think a very firm statement that you guys, you know, you developer, you know, you applicant, you should follow these. But of course they do, you know, it's maximum extent practicable. There's always escape clauses. And then later on it says something like, well, design guidelines are really a framework for dialogue that sheds light on expectations and opportunities. So it should be used during the review process early on. So I come away sometimes wondering, you know, how firm are these, but feeling in general much better. I think there's some good examples in here. I was glad we had a chance to take a look at them, that we can indeed, in certain, you know, key places, maybe specify things that, okay, you can't exceed X height, you can't have more than such candle power, and that would be a lot of work to do. So my final question on this is, I can see sort of cribbing some stuff from these design guidelines. I don't know how appropriate or legal that is, since Danby hired somebody, Dryden hired an outside group to make their design guidelines, whether we would also need to hire some outside firm, or whether we can actually do this in-house in this committee.
We have,
or at least I guess.
well, we have hired an outside planner.
Okay, so you're talking Greg in
On our
that sense.
committee.
Yeah. Okay, that's true. I take that correction. So at any rate, as to just how far we can go, how is this group going to hand us a design guidelines to the town board, or simply say, here's roughly the idea and more work is needed after December? So anyway, that's what I took out of those design guidelines.
Barbara Lynch.
Yeah, let's see. Am I mute?
No, you weren't muted. Now you're muted. Muted, Barbara.
Okay. I worried just a bit in the Dryden guidelines that they were encouraging a kind of suburban preciousness that was at odds with the agricultural, what they claim to be the agricultural nature, the rural nature of the town. And what I'm wondering is how far down this design road. Bill answered some of my questions, that a lot of this is recommendations. But I think that you want to limit size, you want to think about use, you want to think very much about economic impact, but maybe not so much about whether there's a stone wall or whether we use wood and stone. You know, these details of construction might create a false uniformity if carried too far.
Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to echo what the most recent people have said, but it wasn't clear to me. I guess I have a question, because these guidelines, do they fit into, are they a subset of existing law? Are they, what's the enforcement mechanism? Is there an enforcement mechanism? Yeah,
Greg,
that's my
answer that?
question.
Greg?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. So Dryden's, let me pull those up. Danby's are an addendum to their zoning ordinance. So they are specifically, they were just an amendment to the zoning ordinance. And Dryden's, I'm sorry, I've got a couple of tabs.
So Greg,
I'm going to jump in real quick, Greg. I think the answer for Caroline is the site plan review law, which currently exists, has some design guidelines in it. And what we would do in Caroline, since we don't have zoning and aren't likely to, you know, it's a big process to get to, that the near-term goal would be potentially to modify the existing guidelines. And they're where, you know, they are not part of the law, but they are now have been pulled out, and they are sort of like, I don't know quite how they are, but they're a document that is attached to the law. And maybe Tim or Greg knows the exact details of that, but we'd be modifying the existing design guidelines that are under the site plan review law.
And they are their law. They are part of that site plan review law.
okay.
You had your hand up.
So we can I just ask, so
Yes.
can we could recommend as a committee certain addendums or revisions to the existing site plan review law?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Jonathan?
Thanks.
I think they were answered. I actually just missed, I got distracted. So, and one of them was not. Is that correct?
Both
Correct.
Dryden and Danby have zoning.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and that's a good point, Barbara. So they both have zoning, but Danby's has tied them to their zoning ordinance, and they amended their zoning ordinance to include it as an appendix. And then Dryden's is its own separate document outside of zoning, but they're referenced in the zoning ordinance as they must be, these uses must adhere to the design guidelines.
Okay, because that was my question. It's important that we look at the surrounding towns' way they handle these laws, but I think what's important here too is we need more information to make these decisions around pre-zoning decisions. So I guess this helps us get towards putting these laws along with zoning potentially if we decide to go that road in this town, but it doesn't really help us in our current situation because we don't have zoning. Does that make sense?
I'm going to inject that. No, that I think that's not correct.
Right.
Because again, we have design guidelines as part of site plan review, which is a law that exists in Caroline. We don't have to have zoning. We could take the design guidelines that we see in Danby and Dryden and write them up and put them as part of our site plan review. There's nothing in their design guidelines that requires having zoning, except the case they reference, oh, and we also have zoning and you got to pay attention to that too, or things like that. That's my understanding.
Thank you very much.
Ellen?
Bill pointed out that the design guidelines for Dryden are a funny mix of very specific, 18 feet tall of this, and Barbara Lynch, I think, pointed out some concerns about the dictation of what it looks like in a way that perhaps makes it cute and not necessarily what we need. But then there also are these references to a big generality. It should preserve views or whatever, and they're not specific standards for that. So I find it a little hard to figure how how we might make it work, that it's specific enough to address the things that we're worrying about, whether it's energy use or views. I also wondered, under the design guidelines, through the existing laws that we have, where we could in fact limit size. We could say no formula business shall occupy more than 3,000 square feet. Or do we think that would require a separate law and couldn't be under design standards?
From my understanding, we can do that.
As design, under design standards, would be your understanding?
Greg, can you clarify that?
And does that go under the addendum, whatever, or does it go somewhere else? So Greg, yes, I guess answer that.
Yeah, that's a tricky question, Ellen. But I think in terms of Caroline right now, that would be the place where those restrictions would go under, would be the site plan and design guidelines. I think what's making me hesitate is just outright can just present other sort of legal challenges.
One of the other things that I was just going to add regarding Barbara Lynch's comments about aesthetics, the aesthetic design is one of the things that I thought was interesting about Danby's guidelines. I'm pretty sure it was in Danby's, is I'm not sure if it's a direct refusal, let's say imported prefabbed materials. And that kind of design guidelines could actually very, very much serve to discourage drop in place formula business buildings. So there are things that I saw in the Danby guidelines that I thought would be potentially helpful if in going in a certain direction towards local self-definition of aesthetics. It wouldn't necessarily ban the formula business itself, but maybe if we had to go that route, maybe the Vermont example would be preferable than nothing. Jonathan.
I don't want to be taking up too much airspace. I know there's plenty of other people here that have questions, but and this isn't in reference necessarily to but in other municipalities, I know I'm from Virginia, and very rural places will say you can't build a house unless you have it's on a certain acreage, or something like that, or you can't cut up a certain acreage to smaller pieces. Those are actual limits that are set typically in zoning laws. In zoning laws, I don't see why you can't do them in town laws that aren't zoning laws. So to me, saying you can't build unless it's a certain acreage is similar to saying you can't build in our town unless you're a certain square footage. I don't know, maybe clarify that.
We do have a subdivision law that does delimit how many buildings, for example, you can put on a subdivided lot, still within site plan review. So just to clarify that Caroline does have something.
I think I think that Alan's specific question was whether you could put that size restriction as part of site plan review. Jonathan, I expect that one could pass a law townwide saying 3,000 square foot, no stores above that size, or form of business or something. That is, to me, more likely. It's still possibly challengeable. So Greg, I'll let you chime in on that. But I think the specific question was, can we do this outside of site plan? I think that was sort of Ellen's question.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that. What I was going to comment on was that the town of Ulysses just recently passed or amended their zoning ordinance where they restricted the size of certain types of agricultural buildings. And so, I mean, that presents a whole nother host of sort of issues with the ag and markets law, but there are examples of towns, yeah, restricting the types of uses on lots. But to the question of does that need to be in the site plan law as an amendment or revision, or does it need to be part of a separate law? I'm not entirely certain, and that might just be a question for the lawyer of yeah. So I think it just deserves a little bit more research.
Gizman?
Yeah. So actually, can we discuss what actually town of Caroline need in comparison to our reference, the Dryden and Danby? They have zoning, right? And then they have design guideline. Our case right now, we do not have a zoning, but we want to go through the design guideline. And according to the reading, actually design guideline heavily emphasize on the physical aspect, but the economic impact review or social thing. The Caroline site plan review has design guideline and also environmental impact assessment. That's good, but lack of the economic impact review and social. So maybe we need to focus on what is actually town of Caroline need right now. Thank you so much.
This is Catherine. I agree with Usman. And I don't know how to say this, but it seems like we're going into a very granular level of of the design aspect of it. And I know design is more than how pretty it is. I'm a creative director, so I get that. But I do think we don't have any definition of, we have a great comprehensive plan that defines our best agricultural land and then where proposed clusters of population growth should go. I don't know if the views and the scenic things are outlined, but like to Usman's point, until we have some sort of, I hate to use the word zoning because everyone seems so afraid of it, but a proposed zoning areas, like if we were going to have growth, you could do it here, even if it's economic growth, such as more stores or whatever, and then back it up as why we've proposed that. Well, we've proposed it. We've done, what was the map? So for instance, and I'm sorry, I hope I sound coherent on this, but so a great thing I hear is we want to cluster where new housing developments go. But that's in direct conflict with the best agricultural land. I mean, look at Boiseville. They built on some of the best agricultural land in the area because there was no zoning. Oh, well, pretty good. My husband said it was good. He was on the board at the time. So he was allowed to build that little community, which is a beautiful little community. I have no problems with it. But I guess I'm interested in seeing what other people think about defining these areas, these potential zoning areas, before we get into the design guidelines. Because I agree, we need the design guidelines, but like Usman said, some of it's covered already in site review. So I guess, where are we going as this committee for that aspect?
Ellen.
No, I think it's a good question, and potentially, it seems to me, design guidelines, and I know that the site plan review law will mention things like preservation of resources, agricultural soils, and I don't know what kind of teeth could be in a design. I'd like to call them standards rather than guidelines, because to me, guidelines is let's talk about it, and standards are this is what you got to do. But whatever we call it, suppose could the design guidelines or standards say basically you can't permanently modify the land surface of our prime agricultural soils in the county? Could that be a design standard that we say that? Because one of the things I feel extraordinarily strongly about is the fact that you can't make new land. And once you've paved it, built on it, it's no longer available forever. And I believe that with climate change, we are going to see our agricultural lands becoming increasingly important and valuable. California's gone up in flames and it's losing all its water. So I feel extraordinarily strongly that that's something we need to do. And I'm interested in whether design guidelines could be a tool rather than just saying, tell us what you're going to do about it, whether we can actually say you can't do it.
And I'm going to sort of second what Tim said earlier, which is I think it's important that we continue thinking, working on several fronts. I agree. It sort of sometimes feels like, you know, we're down in the weeds and then we're back out here. We're down in the weeds and we're doing this backwards or forwards. But, you know, I've got to beg off this meeting real soon, so I'll give you all my basic take on it. You know, I think, you know, this committee could come to a point where they can set some near-term and short-term goals. And it seems to me that zoning, which would be a very important tool for the town of Caroline to seriously consider, is, no matter how you look at it, a long-term goal. And so I don't want to, you know, my personal view, okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to come up with a zoning map for in this committee, because that's the job of the zoning commission that would eventually propose zoning to the town. It's a big job. What I would prefer the committee put its energy into, despite the fact that it feels like we're getting down in the weeds too soon, is looking at what can be achievable in a 3 to 5 month timetable. Like Tim wants it to be 2 months, so we're done in, yeah, I know, yeah, we're done in November, I got it. And to me, what's missing in the town, that's part of what Catherine asked, is, you know, from my perspective on the planning board, and I would not necessarily have answered this 2 years ago, but now that I've been looking at this stuff for a couple of years, one thing the town is missing is zoning, so that we can clearly protect areas from development that are prime agricultural soils and have other good benefits to the town. But in addition, protect our vibrancy as a unique local place, we do need to have some things in place that will sort of restrict some of these out-of-town businesses from coming in, because the town has said it values local businesses. So from the business restrictions, and I think understanding the economics of what's going on. So I think the lack of any economic analysis right now is a big hole. Mm-hmm. So those are two pieces that I would love to see incorporated into site plan review. And I put it that way, and I did earlier, because that's a tool we've got already. And so to my mind is something we can get done in a short-term horizon. But I will emphasize that is, you know, my view, but Catherine asked what's missing, what the town needs. I think what the town needs is a smaller square footprint before site plan review is triggered. I think it needs an economic analysis as part of site plan review. And I think it needs stronger design guidelines or standards as part of site plan review. And that's a good short-term goal, but that does not have to be the only goal of this committee. But that's my take on it. And now I will go away because I have to go do some other stuff. So thank you all. It's been a good meeting.
Thank you. That was really great. Thanks.
So in relationship to, I guess, following up on Bill's suggestion, I mean, I do think that we might be at the stage where it might not be unhelpful to pursue in more detail 2 or 3 different strategies, and maybe break ourselves up into smaller study groups or something. And that's one way that I could see working through the weeds. Because we can't do weeds. We can't all do weeds on everything. And so that would be one kind of moving forward suggestion that I'd have. I mean, I was thinking of potentially a group seriously working on formula business. It doesn't mean that we would end up, that the task force would end up recommending any of these things, but it's clear that we need more refinement in terms of our understanding of some of these strategies. Design guidelines would clearly be another one. And I was thinking before the meeting, and now I'm thinking about it much more, that to do a little bit more research on what an economic impact review might be or might entail could end up being extremely helpful. I mean, all of these could be potentially tweaked in relationship to one another into one kind, if 1 or 2 kinds of proposals that can conceivably be made to the town board. Personally, as a town board member, I would think it could be extremely helpful where the task force, and it might not be able to be at a stage, but were it to be able to arrive at a stage of delivering some very, very concise and detailed recommendations to the board, such as design review, etc. And these are the sorts of things that, as I've been reading around, I think are potentially achievable if the task force, you know, is interested in going in that direction. So I guess one question would be, what do you all think about this? And if we were to divide ourselves up, who would like to do what, and how would we get this? What would we do then? It might just mean some more intense conversations, because it's clear that the more we talk about this, the more questions arise, or the better strategies are articulated.
So it's Catherine. I clapped again. No idea how to get the wave thing to work. And I'm on Zoom, like from
Don't worry, we see you clapping. We see you clapping.
Okay. So can I just, because I was a project manager for years, I would like to reread this back, and I want to make sure I understand what you just said. So we based on what Bill says and what this whole conversation has been, which has been great, we need stronger design, and I'm going to go with standards. I think guidelines, throw that out the door, because it's not a rule, it's standards. This is what you need to adhere for. So one area of focus would be stronger design standards, and it sounds like it potentially could be incorporated into the site plan review. I think that could be part of that exercise. 2 was a stronger, and no, I define formula business and propose that, like propose our definition of a formula business. 3, an economic impact review, which scares me because I wouldn't know how to do that. But I think a study on why we need it, what it is, what it takes, and what it can do, you know, basically. So that sounds like those were 3 strong areas that we as a group could break off and sink our teeth in. Did I hear that right, or am I missing something?
Ellen, you have your hand up.
I think you have it exactly the way I understood. The only thing I would amend to that is, in terms of the formula business, what I would hope that the group would look at is not just the definition, but with what standards they would like to see adopted. We can then talk about tools after that. But I think to talk about not just how do you define it, but what is acceptable in our town. What do we want to see a formula business be like if we're going to allow them? But otherwise, I thought you had it just right.
So that's excellent, because then we could put, thank you, then we could, because Bill said we needed long-term goals, and I agree with him. So once for this formula business is the defining and standards and what we wanted it to look like, a long-term goal would be to establish the tools to actually do that. Sounds like what you said.
I don't think necessarily. I think
Oh,
what
okay.
we need to look at is what do we want to accomplish in that regard? And then we can look at, are there short-term ways to get there? It seems to me.
Sorry, Michelle.
I think I'm confused about the economic impact statement, right? I guess I interpreted that as you could require an economic impact study for any project. It wasn't like a big general thing we decided, and you actually hired outside experts to do that. Is that correct?
I think that's true, but in order to require that, there would have to be some parameters. I would think that the task force would recommend as a tool.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Then
That
you
to happen, and I think it would be helpful for us to, especially since we haven't really discussed this at all, to look into this a little bit more. I mean, I guess one of the questions that I just had thinking procedurally is to ask any of you if any of you have had, and this might be to those with planning backgrounds actually, any experience with economic review, or would be could help lead that discussion. We're coming up with a screen full of blanks. Barbara?
I would be happy to be part of that discussion. I'm not sure. And I would be very happy to work with 2 or 3 other people on, what really ought to go into an economic analysis, what makes a meaningful economic analysis, what should we be including? And, just that sort of thing.
And of course, one of the contexts of this would also be, I would think would have to come eventually with recommendations of scope. I mean, you're not going to require an economic analysis of everything. So that would be part of the thinking around this, right?
Right.
Gizman, did I see you gesturing that you might be interested in tackling this?
Yeah, I like to join Barbara then.
Okay, that's good. Ellen?
I would be interested in working on design standard / guidelines.
All right. Anybody else? Michelle, do you have any preferences?
I guess I'd be interested in working on design standards.
Rebecca?
Is there anybody digging into the economic impact review?
That was Barbara and me,
Yeah.
but you could certainly
Okay.
join them.
I'll do that.
Okay, great.
Which Barbara? Just so I know.
Oh,
Lynch.
Lynch. Barbara Newth, do you have any?
Yeah, I'd be interested in the design standards if that's still available. If not, I would do formula business.
We yet to have any formula business takers? Ken, did you raise your hand? Ken, you're on mute. I'm sorry. You're on mute, Ken. You're still on mute. Ken, you're on mute.
I lost you all. I'm sorry. I came up with a blank screen all of a sudden here, and I've
Sorry.
just gotten it back.
So what
So,
what we're doing, Ken, is we had decided to break into 3, call them study groups. One on design standards,
Okay.
one on formula business, and one on economic impact review. And we're wondering if you had
well,
any
and
interest.
when you talk about formula business, what are you looking for there? A definition, or
We're
I'm not
looking,
sure what you're looking for.
we're looking both for definition and proposal in terms of how you would, how one would enact it. What would be the parameters? Not simply a definition of what it is, but how Caroline would then enact it.
Well, I'll send you the definition that I had gotten, but I probably I don't know much about economic review, but I have some ideas, I guess. I mean, we want to find out whether or not we do harm to the environment, whether we do not to local businesses. What advantages does formula business have for us? So I guess I would try to work with that group.
With economic impact review
It sounded like formula business.
or formula business
tried.
or economic impact? I wasn't sure. Ken.
No, with the economic review. The economic review
Not what it-
is what I think I would like to
All right.
work with.
Okay.
Well, then I
So-
guess I'll do formula business. This is Catherine. I would love the design standards, but that's okay. But I'd love your definition, Ken, if you could.
Can we
share that.
volunteer
Sure.
Jonathan, since he's left us? You always, you leave a meeting early, danger. Are you there, Jonathan? I don't think so. Can we volunteer
No,
him to look at formula business?
I think we could.
Yeah.
I would be interested.
And maybe Bill will be interested, although Bill is in and out of the committee, so he might, I think he's got his hands full in the next 2
I
weeks.
think he's
So
got
let's let Bill worry about the comprehensive plan,
Okay.
because we really need
Yeah, we
that
do.
first. And I can help discuss formula business if that would help, just to round it out.
And
Sure.
where Barbara Newth fallen out?
Yeah, I think I was going to be design standards if I could.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I have is for design standards is Ellen, Michelle, and Barbara Newth. For formula business, Catherine, Jonathan, Tim. For economic impact, Barbara, Yasmin, Rebecca, and Ken. And I think that's everybody, right? Okay, so then the next question is, how would you like to proceed with these little study groups? Yes, Ellen?
I think what you were going to say is, how do we want the study groups to go, and how do we want them to integrate with the whole?
I mean, one question is whether you would want to have the groups meet individually next Monday. And maybe in the meantime, I don't know if maybe in that amount of time, Greg might be able to feed some additional stuff to the groups. Greg?
Yeah, that sounds good. And especially, just looking at our schedule, Tim, if there possibly is something to present and to be, adopted by the town board by December, we would likely have to go to them in early November for, a seeker review. And so if we're just
We
looking at
won't
the
need to do a seeker review, I don't think, for design guidelines.
If it's an amendment, I guess I'll leave that out. I'll leave seeker out of this for right now. If it's an amendment, possibly not. But
let me just, so in relationship to the schedule, which is what you're getting at.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
I think what we can have two things in mind. We can have ideal delivery. An ideal delivery of something would be November. that might not end up being realistic. It's really important that the group be confident and comfortable with its outcomes. And if it takes us a little bit more time and we stretch into December, there are ways that the town board can then accommodate that. So does that help, Greg? I mean, let's shoot for November and just see what can happen, because as it now stands, if we break up into little groups next week, that's already the first week of October. The first time we'd get back together again would be the second week of October. That gives us only 2 more weeks to deliver something, firm. So that's probably a huge ideal, but let's shoot for it. Let's see what happens. Does that sound practical? So then the question is how you would like to meet. We're using for this big group the town's Zoom, and I don't know practically whether we can set up multiple Zooms at the same time. Let me look into that tomorrow. Do any of you have your own Zooms and would be willing to?
I have my Zoom account, so
Yeah, I mean, you could lead the Zoom of economic impact.
But this is free account. It's not paid account, so only maybe 40 minutes. But that won't work.
Okay. No, that won't work.
That
I
won't
have
work.
a Zoom.
Rebecca, you have a Zoom? Okay.
Do you?
I have one.
So Rebecca, you can do economic impact.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else?
Thanks, Rebecca.
I have Zoom. I can do any meeting.
And Catherine, you can do formula business. And then with the town, maybe we can have Ellen, since you're on the site plan review, is it okay if I put you as the cog and I'll arrange it for you to do the town?
Sure.
Town Zoom. Okay. Catherine, you said you did the Zoom, right?
Yes, I can run the meetings.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so I think, does that sound like a good working plan, everybody? And I think this also give us a chance to read in more detail what we distributed this week, as well as feeding any additional material. And then I think that we can come back together really, ideally, a little bit more focused. Barbara, lunch?
I think it would be helpful, Tim, if you could just send us a charge, for each group. What is it that you would like to see produced at the end, so that we have kind of concrete goals?
I guess I can try to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for next week, I wouldn't encourage you to have a concrete goal of anything.
No, but the end game.
Well, what I recommend is that we meet in individual groups next week, and then we come back the following week and have the groups report in. And then at that point, we can talk about charges, and because it might well be that a group could come back and say, we've just decided that this isn't a viable alternative, right? Is that all right? I can come up with fictional charges right now. And the charge would be basically investigate this and make a recommendation. Decide if you're going to make a recommendation, and if you're going to make a recommendation, try to go in the weeds. But it might well be that after next week, we'll end up having 2 groups instead of 3 groups, for example. People's thoughts?
Can I just add on to what Barbara was saying? That I think that is a good question, and maybe just having a couple. I just jotted down a couple questions here. to
But
frame
that's
it.
why you're here.
What's that?
That's why you're here.
Yeah, just to frame your reading, I would think about, well, just first of all, what is it that you're researching? How can it be employed, or how has it been employed in other towns? But then, obviously, drilling into Caroline, how can it be? Is this appropriate for Caroline? We want to know, with especially just looking at Caroline's comprehensive plan, because so many of these local laws and ordinances are just referencing the comprehensive plan. And so just using that as a frame of reference. And then certainly the implications, if you can, about some of the, have there been legal challenges? I know we kind of get a little bit muddied. Ellen, you're shaking your head. No, you don't want to get into that. Or I just think
premature.
A little premature. Okay. All right. Maybe
I don't think that's our job. I think, as we know, any law can be challenged, and we have to be prepared for that. I think, know that might happen. I don't think I'm prepared to do legal research and look at what's happened around the country on these things. Don't believe that that's our job. I think if we come up with something, then we can refer it to Guy Crow saying, is it a realistic thing? But as you know, as you said with the Dryden fracking ban, oh my God, we can't do it, blah, 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 and it stood up. So I think we need to go forward with what we think needs to happen, make that recommendation to the town board, and not be getting weak in the knees because we might get sued, because I just think that's not a useful way to get what we want out of it. And I guess in terms of a charge, I agree with Tim, we don't need a detailed charge, but I think it's important for each group to understand what we're trying to get to. And it was stated, I think, in terms of the economic stuff, what's realistic, what might an economic analysis include, when might it get triggered? Those are the kinds of things I would think that group might want to talk about. And in terms of formula business, how is it defined? What do we think we want to see in the town in regard to formula business? Do we want to just regulate the way it looks? Do we want to regulate whether it can be there? Do we want to talk about how many can be, how close to each other? Those are the kinds of things that's been addressed. And in terms of the design standards, let's look at our current design standards and see, as I say, they're all just questions rather than real standards. So it seems to me that we need enough of a sense of what we're trying to accomplish that we can go there. But I don't want to get into, is that legal at this point?
And the legal thing is something the town board will be concerned about, and it's really its business. I mean, so I would tend to agree with all of you not to get too overwhelmed by the legal, because the town board will get overwhelmed by the legal, and it'll just be, I mean, for the town board, the greatest thing that it can have is clear recommendations. And this is all very helpful. Sorry, the guideline, the charge just completely caught me off guard. I think I've had a really long day, Barbara, so I apologize. But and I think Greg takes such detailed notes that I think tomorrow or the next day or so we can send out something more concise.
And apologies on getting them a little bit late. That I'll get them out within a couple of days. Last week was sort of the perfect storm of a lot of deadlines for me. Just took a little bit, but I'll get that out, as well as some material for each of the groups.
One of our guests, Will Lawrence, has chatted me asking, would the smaller groups still be open to the public? That's a really good question. Well, as I'm sitting here, I think I'm just too tired to think about this.
They're not required to be.
I think in a way that's going to be rather impractical, Will, especially because 2 of these groups will be hosted by private Zooms, and so I think that the realistic thing will be to invite the public back into engagement with these issues as the groups come back and report the following week. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? And if any of the, of course, since we like to operate according to privilege of the floor, the group that I'm involved with, which will be Formula Business, let's say no Catherine. So it would have to be the group that Ellen is running because she's using the town Zoom. Ellen, at the very beginning of because the town Zoom meeting will probably be openable to the public. Would you just mind doing a privilege of the floor at the beginning? And then, so that meeting, I think practically speaking, will be open to the public, and the other ones, it's just too complicated. And since we're trying to do the best we can, both in spirit, I think for our spirit, we really want the public involved. But practically and legally, there are going to be some contingencies along the way. Does this sound good for everyone? This has been a tremendously productive discussion. Again, I mean, the group is just so great, and you're so detailed, which I think is going to end up being extremely helpful to you. Ellen, did you have something you want to say?
I'll need to get the addresses of the people I'm supposed to address.
Well, I'll send out, in the next day or so, we'll send out detailed everything
Thanks.
for everybody.
And
that way we can communicate with you.
Appreciate
Thank you, everybody. I hope you feel like we're starting to at least come to some common orientation. And this is very complicated stuff, and it's not all going to happen overnight, that's for sure. Thanks very much.
Is there going to be a privilege of the floor here at the end?
At the sure. I'm not sure who's speaking, please.
This is Greg Reynolds.
Can you tell us where you live, just so we understand where you are?
I own a farm in the town of Caroline. I am not always able to attend meetings, but I would like to request that all the video from the different meetings be posted on the town's website, and that we use the open meetings law as a way of communicating and involving the community, and that we not use private Zoom or emails, that those should be public record so that everybody can participate.
can we, I appreciate what Greg is saying.
Yes.
Can we record our smaller meetings and then post them so people can be apprised of the conversations?
Yes, I think that would be entirely possible.
Okay.
And let me just look into everything and see what's all possible.
Okay.
You know, it well could be that we could have three contiguous town Zooms. I don't think so. I'll look into everything. I mean, Greg, we're very, very, very much appreciate that, and I think everybody on the task force is aligned with your proposal. We'll do the best.
Will that please him if it's posted?
I'm sorry, Ken?
Will it please Greg there if it's posted on the website, the videos of each of the groups? From what he said, he wanted to be. That's be okay?
Yes, that would be fine, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. We very much appreciate having you involved. And Greg, the previous task force meetings are posted through the town website. So you can, if you were unable to attend, you can always catch up. Ellen, you had
what is the legal requirement for how far ahead of a meeting does it have to be posted?
I'll find out. I think it's just a few days, but for this, I don't think that we're obligated for open meeting law for task force meetings.
Yeah, that's what
we've decided to have open meetings.
Right.
Dedication to the public, but legally it's not a requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, also my husband was on the town board and he just confirmed that task force meetings do not need to be public. And I'm sure this one's fine, but like the little tiny 3 of us meeting, I don't know, we're probably it's fine. I'll try to record it. I can't promise the quality.
So
Right.
I mind if I, oh, sorry, Michelle, you were first, go.
Michelle.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that you can, I think Zoom has the capability to do breakout rooms. So Tim, you might be able to set up breakout rooms for each of
That's
these
not a bad
groups.
idea. Just let me just check into all of the options. You're right. I've but
Well,
right, something like that does exist.
my
I've
daughter's
skipped mass leave. I've sadly avoided it.
teaching online, so she's been setting that up for people.
I just want to quickly clarify, I think maybe to Catherine's point too, so per the open meetings law, every meeting of a public body shall be open to the general public, and the definition of public body for which a quorum is required, in which consists of 2 or more members performing a governmental function for the state or for the agency or department thereof. And so because we have Tim and Ellen and possibly Bill, this might consist of a public body or an open meeting, the task force.
I'm not sure, but we've been doing it public, so.
If there's 3, that would, if there's 3 public officials at a meeting, there, it's a public meeting.
Okay, but let's go.
There's three-
I think we're done.
Well, we're going to take care of this, so thank you. But I think we're all set. So thanks, everybody. Have a really, really good week. I appreciate your hard work. And I'll check in with you in the morning, Greg.
Yep, very good.
See you. Night.